Cliff Richard disappeared from view. We now understand why. Sir Cliff Richard was known as the Peter Pan of pop because of his unparalleled longevity, dominating British music charts for decades. With a career spanning an incredible 60-plus years and more than 250 million recordings sold worldwide, his place in music history seemed assured. Then, almost out of nowhere, one of the most enduring performers in music disappeared from the public eye. The fade was not gradual. According to a veteran BBC producer who had collaborated with Richard on multiple TV specials, it was as if someone had flipped a switch. Suddenly, one of the most identifiable voices in the history of British music became silent. No television appearances, no tours confirmed, and no new albums. It was a deafening absence for someone who had been a fixture in entertainment since the late 1950s. This disappearance wasn't merely a well-earned retirement or a short break. The events that followed were so catastrophic that insiders questioned whether Cliff Richard, the musician who had endured every musical fad, from disco electronic pop to rock and roll, would ever make a comeback to the public eye. We're delving into the startling reality of Sir Cliff Richard's enigmatic withdrawal from the public eye today. A story of personal pain, legal disputes, and betrayal that sent one of music's most enduring singers into exile. In addition to personal hardships, the true narrative also includes a systemic failure that almost ended his illustrious career and his health. Let's first examine Cliff Richard's remarkable place in music history prior to his abrupt departure, as well as the reasons why his absence left the entertainment industry with such a noticeable gap. Set sail. His disappearance was surprising because of his unparalleled legacy. Cliff Richard's unique place in music history must be recognized in order to fully comprehend the significance of his abrupt disappearance. No other artist in British chart history had accomplished what Richard had, starting with his 1958 single Move. It, which is frequently regarded as Britain's first real rock and roll record, hit records for 6 decades in a row. According to a music historian who has studied British pop culture since the 1960s, Cliff wasn't simply another aging pop singer, the only performer to have effectively traversed every musical era, from pre-Beatles rock to the digital age. He was a living institution. He continued to be considered culturally significant even when his music wasn't popular. His career statistics are unbelievable. With more than 130 singles, albums, and EPs, he made it to the UK Top 20 ranking third in the history of the UK singles chart, behind only the Beatles and Elvis Presley. Cliff Richard was more than just a performer to generations of British music lovers. He was as dependable and well-known as the monarchy itself. Cliff's cultural ubiquity, not just his commercial success, was what set him apart. According to a longtime EMI Records executive, Wimbledon rain delays, royal variety shows, and Christmas TV specials. In addition to his music, Cliff was deeply ingrained in British culture. His abrupt departure created a gap in several entertainment situations at once. His absence was all the more noticeable because of this cultural pervasiveness. The musician abruptly quit creating new music after releasing at least one album almost annually since 1959. He stopped making his usual appearances on television. He abruptly stopped touring, which had been his customary routine even into his 70s. What could possibly make a performer so tenacious and reliable turn away from the audience that had backed him for more than 60 years? The police raid that would destroy his sense of security and set off a media nightmare, unlike anything he had encountered in his lengthy career, is where the solution starts. It was Cruz who welcomed him today. However, he and his friend Gloria Hunterford appeared in the High Court to explain the public humiliation he experienced after a police raid that altered everything was shown by the BBC. Cliff Richard was a clean-living, devout performer whose world fell apart in a way that would have been unthinkable for him on August 14, 2014. He was on holiday in Portugal when he learned that South Yorkshire police were raiding his property in Berkshire in relation to a prior sexual assault accusation from 1985. According to a veteran Metropolitan Police detective with knowledge of the case, it was not only the raid that occurred, but also its manner that made it remarkable and ultimately devastating for Cliff. The BBC had been warned beforehand. As police searched Richard's house, they had a helicopter hovering over it, broadcasting the raid live. The amount of media attention given to an investigation at this early stage was unusual. What should have been a private investigation became a worldwide media circus due to this exceptional violation of regular police protocol. Richard's house was on live television, with commentators making real-time predictions about the accusations before he had even been questioned by police or charged with any crime. According to a longtime friend of the artist, imagine finding out that your house is being raided not from the police, but from friends calling to tell you they're watching it happen, live on television. Before a full inquiry had even started, Cliff said he felt like he was being strung out to dry. In a moment, the presumption of innocence, which is meant to be the cornerstone of justice, was destroyed. Richard was severely impacted right away. Those close to him reported that he experienced physical signs of shock, such as fast weight loss, insomnia, and uncontrollable shaking. Suddenly, the performer, who had remained remarkably healthy and energetic into his 70s, looked weak and weakened. It wasn't just the allegation itself, which he knew was false and would eventually be disproven. One of his management team members disclosed. Everything was the fact that everything was public, that he felt betrayed by the organizations he had trusted, and that the media tried him right away before he had a chance to defend himself. It was absolutely devastating to someone with Cliff's sense of personal honor, and this terrible public display was the start of an ordeal that would keep him away from recording and public performance for almost 4 years, a time when his physical and mental well-being would be put to the test by a system that appeared to have abandoned the values of fair treatment he had relied on all his life. You know, I always eat the right food. I try to eat the right food for me, and today I went to the gym for 45 minutes, but not to lose weight. I'm already thin, so I don't want to lose weight. The public never saw the serious health crisis that resulted from the investigation and media coverage of Cliff Richard's disappearance from the entertainment industry. People don't realize that Cliff almost died during this time, according to a longtime member of his inner circle, who saw his decline firsthand. His body literally started shutting down under the stress, a physical and psychological collapse that those closest to him feared might prove fatal for the then 73-year-old performer. The psychological effects were equally severe, with friends reporting that Richard suffered from symptoms typical of post-traumatic stress disorder, such as intrusive thoughts, insomnia, and moments of disorientation. He lost over 2 stone 28 pounds in a matter of weeks. He developed shingles, which can be fatal for someone in their 70s, and his doctors were genuinely worried that the stress might cause a heart attack or stroke. According to a close friend who spent time with him during this time, the performer, who was known for his unwavering optimism and religious faith, found himself in a dark place that ran counter to everything about his public persona. He would wake up in cold sweats at 3 or 4 in the morning, and occasionally he was unable to recall where he was. The investigation continued for nearly 2 years, without charges being brought, prolonging the period of uncertainty and preventing Richard from fully recovering his health. It was heartbreaking to see a man who had performed flawlessly on stages all over the world for decades, never forgetting a lyric or missing a cue, suddenly struggling with basic daily functions. According to a security consultant who advised him during this time, he effectively became a prisoner, first in his home in Portugal and then moving between secure locations, making even routine activities difficult, as he faced the possibility of public recognition and possible harassment. Every time he appeared in public, there was a chance that someone would shout accusations or that photographers would take unflattering pictures that could contribute to the negative narrative. This forced seclusion was especially harsh for someone who had always enjoyed a friendly, open relationship with the public, and doctors who treated Richard during this period reportedly became so worried about his declining health that they told his management team to brace themselves for the worst. It's amazing that Cliff vanished from public life during this ordeal, which was witnessed by a doctor who specialized in stress-related illnesses but was not directly involved in Richard's care. The combination of physical symptoms, extreme stress, and advanced age created a potentially fatal situation that the public was largely unaware of as the legal process progressed slowly. It's amazing that he survived it all. This type of stress can have a devastating physiological effect on a person in their 70s, and many people in similar circumstances do not recover. This hidden health crisis explains not only Richard's absence from the entertainment industry, but also the significant shift in his attitude toward public life, even after the investigation was over. In a way, I still feel tarnished, because insufficient implies that perhaps there is some of the financial devastation few understand. He went from being one of Britain's most approachable celebrities to someone who was understandably wary of the systems and institutions that had failed to protect his basic rights. In addition to the serious health effects, Cliff Richard's ordeal unleashed a financial tsunami that few people fully comprehended. with costs so high that they endangered the safety of even a performer of his legendary success. It was estimated that the combined effects of legal fees, missed opportunities, and career damage totaled over £10 million. As an entertainment industry financial advisor, familiar with such cases explained, the public assumes that someone with Cliff's track record must have unlimited resources. However, the truth is that defending yourself against allegations at this level, particularly when the entire police and media apparatus is involved, creates astronomical costs that would strain the finances of even the most successful artists. Richard reportedly spent more than £3 million in legal representation alone during the 2-year investigation, which included complex litigation involving multiple Queen's counsels and teams of specialized attorneys, as well as simultaneous legal actions against the BBC and South Yorkshire Police for their handling of the raid and investigation. Even more significant financial harm resulted from the career impact than from these direct legal expenses. Richard had to postpone a major autobiography, cancel a planned album release and promotional tour, and back out of several high-profile television appearances and concert commitments, resulting in a revenue loss estimated at between £4 and £5 million. According to a music industry executive, who has worked with several artists dealing with public relations crises, there were also substantial expenses that are difficult to pinpoint, such as the harm done to his streaming numbers, the drop in back catalog sales while the investigation was underway, and the cancellation of endorsements and appearance fees. Richard's real estate holdings, which accounted for a significant portion of his net worth, were severely impacted by the events. His Berkshire apartment, which had been the subject of the televised raid, proved effectively unsellable due to its association with the case. These represent millions of dollars in lost income that are more difficult to calculate precisely but no less real. Cliff, who was in his 70s, a time when most people are focused on financial security and legacy planning, explained that the financial impact goes beyond just the immediate costs. Ultimately, Richard was forced to sell the property at a significant loss, reportedly accepting over £800 below its pre-raid market value. These financial pressures help explain why, even after being cleared, Richard didn't immediately return to his previous level of public activity. Instead, he was compelled to sell properties, liquidate investments, and reroute resources to legal battles, rather than future security that creates long-term consequences beyond the immediate expenses. After an ordeal that threatened everything he had built over 6 decades in entertainment, the BBC had to admit that what it had done to him was illegal. His health issues and the need for financial recovery required a more measured strategic approach to rebuilding his career and securing his future. The Crown Prosecution Service declared in June 2016 that Cliff Richard would not be charged by the Crown Prosecution Service because of insufficient evidence, which should have been a triumphant end to his ordeal, but the reality was far more complicated and bittersweet. We asked the BBC to accept this and apologize before litigation began. Cliff had to face the fact that, even if he were exonerated, the raid and the accusations would be the first thing that many people would associate with him. The problem with these kinds of allegations is that no matter how thoroughly they're disproved, some damage can never be undone, said a reputation management specialist who works with public figures facing similar situations. After being cleared of any wrongdoing, Richard took the extreme step of suing the BBC and South Yorkshire Police for their handling of the case. This legal battle would last for another 2 years, until he finally won his case against the BBC in July 2018, when Justice Mann ruled that the broadcaster had violated his right to privacy in a serious and sensationalist manner. Even winning had an emotional cost that prolonged the recovery period and further delayed his return to normal professional activities. The court victory was gratifying but exhausting, exposing a person close to the legal proceedings and requiring Cliff to relive the entire traumatic experience through depositions, testimony, and cross-examination. Even though the monetary compensation was substantial, $2 million, including legal fees, it was insufficient to make up for the years of his career that had been irrevocably lost during a time when time was especially valuable, and it was only a small portion of his actual losses from the 4-year ordeal. For a performer in their 30s or 40s, losing 4 years is significant but recoverable, and for someone in their 70s, it represents a significant portion of their remaining viable performing years. What people often overlook about this case is that Cliff was in the later stages of his career when this occurred. According to a music critic who has followed his work for decades, Richard's absence from public life lasted for almost 4 years after the initial raid. during which he had largely vanished from recording studios, concert venues, and television screens, where he had been a constant presence for the previous 6 decades. This prolonged absence, combined with the lengthy timeline of the investigation and subsequent legal action, explains why Richard's time and opportunity can never be reclaimed, regardless of legal victories. Richard's relationship with his career and public life underwent a significant change as a result of the stress of legal proceedings, which persisted even after he was cleared. This change would become evident as he gradually started to re-enter the spotlight. Lee, Ricky Nelson, Buddy Holly, Gene Vincent. Fans and industry watchers noticed subtle but significant changes in Cliff Richard's approach to his career and relationship with the public when he finally returned to public life following his legal victories. I mean, wonderful, wonderful people that we aren't. Yes. And they're the influences that created us. The comeback on his own terms. The Cliff who returned was not the same Cliff who vanished, according to a concert promoter who collaborated with him on post-investigation performances. He was more selective, more private, and more thoughtful about where and how he interacted with the public. These changes were a direct reflection of the trauma he had endured and the lessons he had learned from his ordeal. This was not simply a return to routine. Rather, it was the beginning of a more circumspect, regulated approach to his public life, which took many tangible forms. Richard drastically cut back on his touring schedule, choosing fewer but more significant venues instead of the long tours that had defined his earlier decades. There was a fundamental shift in priorities. Prior to the investigation, Cliff approached his career with remarkable openness and accessibility. His media appearances became more carefully curated, with greater control over the context in which he would be presented and discussed, a longtime associate explained. After that, his health and mental health became more important than business or public expectations, and he started making choices based on what felt safe and right rather than what might be most profitable or promotional. Most significantly, Richard became a vocal supporter of legal reform pertaining to privacy rights and the way investigations are handled. A media analyst who has researched celebrity privacy cases said, "What's remarkable about Cliff's comeback is that he refused to simply move on or pretend the ordeal hadn't happened." His 2018 autobiography, The Dreamer, focused heavily on his ordeal and its wider implications for justice and media responsibility. What had been a private trauma became the basis for public advocacy that added a new dimension to his legacy. This evolution helps explain why Richard's presence in public life has remained more limited than his pre-investigation activity level. He incorporated it into his public identity, using his platform to highlight systemic issues that had affected him, but also affected many less privileged people who lacked the resources and visibility to fight back. A purposeful recalibration, a conscious decision to interact with the entertainment industry on terms that safeguard his difficult recovery and reflect his re-evaluated priorities following a life-altering event, is what some observers mistook for a diminished career or semi-retirement. Cliff's more measured return is a thoughtful response to the question of whether he would want to resume his previous level of activity after being betrayed by institutions and systems he had trusted, rather than whether he could, according to a member of his management team. "I don't think people understand what it's like to have the legacy protection that became his mission." As Cliff Richard slowly made his way back into the public eye, those close to him recognized a new priority that had fundamentally changed his approach to his career. It was a delicate balance between re-establishing contact with his audience and safeguarding the recovery he had worked so hard to achieve. Protecting and preserving his musical and cultural legacy, after witnessing how easily 60 years of success could be overshadowed by baseless accusations, was a driving force in Cliff's approach to the last chapters of his career. The experience made him ask an existential question, revealing a longtime friend involved in his business affairs. If 60 years of constructive contribution could be so swiftly overshadowed by false accusations, what would be his ultimate legacy? This change took the form of a number of tangible actions. After realizing how easily public opinion could be swayed by outside forces, Richard became more involved in archival projects that preserved his musical catalog, such as remastering old recordings and curating retrospective collections that showcased his artistic development over 7 decades. A music historian who worked on one such project explained that there was a realization that he needed to be more proactive in determining his legacy. Cliff had always been fairly humble about his contributions to the history of pop music, but the investigation made him realize that if he didn't claim his own story, others would. In order to make sure that these facets of his life received the proper attention alongside his entertainment career, Richard expanded his involvement with charitable causes that had long been significant to him, such as the Cliff Richard Tennis Foundation and various Christian organizations. This concern went beyond just his musical accomplishments, to include his wider cultural impact and philanthropic work. As one biographer who has chronicled Cliff's career has observed, what became evident was that Cliff was thinking about posterity in a way he hadn't before. Prior to the investigation, Cliff was so preoccupied with living his career that he hadn't given much thought to how it would ultimately be contextualized historically. And after nearly having his entire life's work reduced to tabloid headlines, legacy preservation became a top priority. This legacy concern helps explain why Richard has been selective about new musical endeavors and public appearances even after his legal vindication, focusing on performances and air recordings that reinforce the aspects of his career he most wants to preserve for future generations, rather than just going back to his previous patterns of activity. According to an associate working on his current projects, every appearance, every interview, and every new recording is now viewed through the lens of how does this contribute to the complete picture of my life's work. This is a fundamentally different approach from the constant activity that characterized the majority of his career. This evolution offers the last piece of insight into why Cliff Richard appeared to disappear, and why his return has been measured and strategic rather than immediate and comprehensive. His disappearance was not simply about healing from trauma or legal battles. However, it reflects a hard-earned wisdom about how quickly public perception can change if you don't actively manage your own narrative. It demonstrated a deep re-examination of his relationship with celebrity and a resolve to make sure that his entire legacy would eventually outlive the most difficult period of his public life.